Hello and welcome back to An Old Man Watches, where today I'm going to be talking about the 1936 horror film slash romantic tragedy, Revolt of the Zombies, which inadvertently emphasizes just how old a film it is by having the opening text crawl refer to the World War. In any case, back in the conflict that we now know as World War One, French and Austro-Hungarian forces face each other across no man's land. Well, I say French. In actual fact, the troops in this segment of the front are mostly recruited from Cambodia, which was then under French dominion. Now, these troops prove highly effective. A mere handful of them are able to overrun an entire trench full of Austro Hungarian troops. Or so we're told. The film's budget doesn't stretch to showing more than a handful of soldiers on either side of this engagement. Now, the source of the troops' success is the magical power of their priest, Xiang, who can put them under voodoo style domination. This leaves them fearless and immune to pain, but without will of their own. Now, this magical power makes these troops terrifying not just to the Austrian forces who must face them, but also to the French commanders who learn of them. Possessed of powers like this, what is to stop the Cambodians from breaking free of French rule? In fact, because boy oh boy, this movie is never going to shy away from being egregiously racist, even for the 1930s. What might this magic mean for the future of the white race? Ugh, I feel dirty just saying that. In any case, despite being in the middle of a brutal conflict that has claimed millions of casualties, France alone would suffer over 1 million combat deaths and 4 million wounded, the French and Austrian commanders join forces against the threat this magic presents, because I guess racism trumps nationalism. I don't know. At first, they intend to simply imprison the priest, but then, after he turns up murdered, they worry that his magic might not have died with him. So they set out on a joint expedition to Cambodia, where they intend to track down any information related to the ritual and destroy it before it can be used again. But if this knowledge does still exist, can everyone on the mission resist the temptation of the power it offers? Now, in 1932, brothers Edward and Vincent Halperin respectively produced and directed a low budget horror film called White Zombie. The movie was a financial success despite receiving at best mixed reviews. One reviewer to be unequivocally approving of it, however, was the Nazi Party, whose censor permitted the film to become one of the few American horror films to be allowed to air in the Third Reich. This is not a recommendation, to my mind. In any case, White Zombie was successful enough that the brothers Halperin saw the potential for a sequel. That project ultimately became this movie. Unfortunately for the producers, a legal tussle denied them the ability to market Revolt of the Zombies as a sequel to White Zombie. Unfortunately for the audience, meanwhile, whether this was a formal sequence or not, one thing that's definitely true is that it's a terrible film. And there are a couple of major reasons why Revolt of the Zombies is a colossal mess of a movie. So let's dig in. So the Halperin brothers were experienced low budget filmmakers who knew the tricks and techniques to stretch a tiny budget to its maximum extent. They also generally made some effort to conceal the limitations that forced that stretching, but not in this film. Perhaps this was because Revolt of the Zombies was always behind schedule, and so they were rushing to catch up. Filming had to be pushed back because no script was ready at their initial start date. So they were under pressure. Perhaps there were other reasons, but whatever the cause, the film looks every bit as cheap as it was. For instance, I get that they didn't have the resources to film at the real Angkor Wat in Cambodia, or even to build a reasonable soundstage facsimile of the ancient site. So I can see why they relied on giant photographic backdrops as probably the only option available to them. But would it be too much to ask that the crew make sure that the photos aren't obviously misaligned, or that all of the planned post production sound effects were actually added to the film? Apparently, it would be too much to ask. But hey, with a good enough or at least sufficiently fun script, sloppy production work might be something I could overlook. I mean, I'm the man who found nice things to say about The Killer Shrews, so I can forgive its financial shortcomings. Alas, however, this film's script runs roughshod over both what was then quite recent history and also, and more importantly, over good sense. Now, from a historical perspective, if you're familiar with maps of earlier 20th century Europe or you know much about World War One, you might already have thought, where are these French and Austrians fighting one another? The film actually talks about a Franco Austrian front. There was no Franco Austrian front. Now, France and Austria Hungary had no shared borders for such a front to exist. However, French and Austro-Hungarian forces did face off on the Italian and Macedonian fronts, so I'm willing to give the partial pass here. The term it uses may be a simplification for easing understanding for the audience. They're not going to pick up on the Macedonian front, which is where the French and the Austro-Hungarians are fighting. Yeah, but still, nothing stopped them from just saying French and Austrian forces rather than mentioning a particular front. Still, this is all minor compared to the script's other issues, such as asking us to believe that two opposing generals in a war were not just cooperating with each other, but mutually agreed to pack off their entire staffs to the other side of the world mid conflict. Now, bear in mind, this is before the convenience of widespread air travel. So they're going to need to travel by sea, a journey that would take 7 weeks these days to travel by sea from the Mediterranean to Cambodia. How have the generals organised this? Isn't somebody going to notice that all these senior officers have disappeared? These are not questions the film will ever address. The script is also tediously slow and drawn out. Rarely has a barely 60-minute film felt so long. And as you may have gathered from previous comments, it's also astonishingly racist, even by the already racist standards of its time. Basically, it's awful on pretty much every front. So awful that even the one potentially interesting element, it comes at the cost of, well, things making sense and stuff actually happening. Now, in professional wrestling, you have good guys who are called faces, and you have bad guys who are called heels. When a good guy becomes a bad guy, or vice versa, that's known as a turn. So a face heel turn is when a crowd favorite, or a supposed good guy whose act isn't working with the crowd, embraces the dark side. And Revolt of the Zombies has a face heel turn as its major plot surprise. Having set up one particular French officer as the apparent leading man, it has him be betrayed by his love interest, who was actually only dallying with his affections to draw the attentions of another man, and by his best friend, who is said other man. Our former hero is then the one who uncovers the secrets of mind control ritual and puts it to use, his key goal being to force his love interest to return his affections, which is both very creepy of him and also basically the same plot as the end of White Zombie. The problem with this twist is that it blocks off any of the obvious and probably more satisfying avenues down which the film could have progressed, such as perhaps having rising tensions between the two groups of enemies who are being forced to work together. You know, there's no sign here that there's any kind of animosity between the French and Austro-Hungarians, who have been, remember, killing each other by the thousands. So yeah, Revolt of the Zombies is in the public domain, so the only thing that watching it will cost you is your time. But frankly, even that is far more than it's worth. Next time, another film in which the apparent main character is betrayed by his love interest and his best friend and then goes off the rails as a result. Also, another film with terrible writing and production, though this time to such an extent that its ineptitude is bewilderingly compelling. It's Tommy Wiseau's infamous offering The Room, which recently celebrated its 21st anniversary of release. But that is next time. Until then, thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. And in the unlikely event you've seen Revolt of the Zombies, let me know what you thought of it.